Whether we realize it or not, stories shape the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. Theater, film, and media do more than entertain, they influence culture, politics, and public discourse. Understanding how these forms of storytelling work can help us become more thoughtful consumers of media and more effective communicators ourselves. To help us explore these issues, I am pleased to welcome Professor Teri Incampo of the University of Mississippi. Professor Incampo's work spans theater, performance, film, and media studies, giving her a unique perspective on the stories that shape contemporary culture. Her most recent project is Maids, Mammies, Maybes: Modern Black Actresses and Their Performance Strategies. Hello, I am Marvin King, and this is Civic Lens. Teri, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marvin. Thank you for having me on.
What first drew you to theater and performance as a field of study?
I actually came to theater as many people come to theater and performance, which is acting. I am from a family of performers and singers, but I was at acting in theatrical productions in my native Denver, Colorado, and then later in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and New York. But after a few years of exploring acting as a potential career, the stars in my eyes, as we all do as budding actors, but also while studying theater as a serious field in undergrad, I was drawn more to directing and dramatic literature and performance theory. And I think that this came from a passion for, as you stated earlier, the capacities for performance to exist as entertainment, but beyond entertainment. Even though I ultimately moved away from acting as a career in that respect, I return to the craft of acting often in my research as a theater historian. But ultimately, when I decided to undertake a master's and then a PhD in theater and performance studies, I was able to more fully untangle that interest of immersing myself in the history of theater and performance studies to explore how theater and non-theatrical performance are both reflecting the societies and cultures in which these artistic expressions emerge, as well as influencing the publics who are seeing these stories. And so my current focus and my research on African American theater and performance offers multiple entry points to these big ideas because there is such a layered history of Black actors and performance forms and how that exists in tension with the role that theater, film, television, other popular entertainment forms have played in shaping our broader ideas about class, gender, and racial belonging in the United States.
How does theater differ from television or film as a storytelling medium? Why does the average consumer like me feel different coming out of a stage production than watching a production on television or in the movie theater?
Sure. The thing that sets theater apart from any of these canned or recorded forms of entertainment or performance is its very ephemeral nature, right? That it is live, that it's happening right now, and that it's going to disappear the moment that it sort of emerges in front of you. It's then sort of already fading. Um, the performance that you watch, whatever play or musical you and your family went to see, what was the most recent thing that you guys went to see?
The Great Gatsby.
Oh, nice. Good choice.
A musical. We were in D.C. and saw this. Loved it.
Yeah, Great Gatsby is having quite a moment right now because it's entered the public domain, so there's many people who are adapting it. But my ultimate point is that whatever version you went to see with those actors at that theater, the performance they performed for you will never exist the exact same way again. That it cannot be performed in that same exact tempo. There were choices that the actors made in the moment that they'll never do again in that exact way. So that very ephemerality is tied to this relationship between the performers who are performing, the performance that they're giving, but also the audience. And I think something else that we have moved away from as our more individual consumer experiences with media has increased is we are experiencing film and television and short form content in isolation. We're doing it maybe at most with the members of our immediate family in our household. Maybe every now and then people will go see a movie at the cinema with, a dozen or up to 100 people. But by and large, the act of going and seeing a show with a huge group of people that are all experiencing the same exact thing you're saying, and you're all only experiencing that one version at that one moment is unique. And the actors can sense the audience. They can hear how you're responding, how you're reacting, and how you are reacting in the moment is going to inform how the performance will unfold there, right? From there forward. If they can hear people laughing or shuffling around or their cell phones going off or crying or sniffling, it will alter how the actors respond in that moment. And that's just not the same dynamics you're going to get in film and television. Those performances have already been performed dozens of times to get the best take. And then it's been stitched together in an editing room by an editor to create one crystallized version of that story. So if an audience in a cinema or you at home with you by yourself or with your family laugh or groan or fall asleep, the actors and directors of that film or television episode will have no idea how their story impacted you in that moment. But in theater, that event, why you're leaving feeling that kind of buzzy feeling is because whether you think about it this way or not, you were participating and you were with a group of people who were also participating in that moment.
That's a great explanation, because when I go to a sporting event and I'm booing, that might affect the athletes, or if I'm cheering for them, that will encourage them and give them motivation. At The Great Gatsby, I have to tell this brief story. The actor playing Jake Gatsby is very handsome. And at the very end, he strips off his shirt and he's going to jump into the pool. And many of the ladies there, I think you had a lot of middle school and high school people there on like tour groups. There was this collective, ah, in the audience. And then that caused other people to start laughing.
Yeah.
Because of that reaction. And your point about every performance is somewhat unique. And the actor, to his credit, straight face, didn't seem to faze him at all. But I'm sure on the inside he was like, I got him.
Yeah. He's like, I'm on tonight,
I'm on tonight. Director needs to give me a raise. So you're right about that. The ephemerality, the uniqueness, the sharing the moment with the audience is critical. And so I've really become a great fan of going to theater. I wish I went more.
It's because you're also a sports fan, right? You believe in the idea of momentum, that the audience can shift the momentum.
That's right. And I would always, if I could afford it, rather go to a game than watch it on TV.
Yeah.
It's a measurably better experience there, provided you don't go broke. Do you feel like there's like a generational, like the students you work with, is there a general appreciation for theater? Is this something that older folks kind of get now in our televised world where you've got television on your phone in your pocket? Is theater as appreciated as much today?
The long time bind of theater has been that it captures people in the very early stages of their life and the very later stages of their life, that it's used as like an education tool. And we use theater for young people to help them develop like a sense of self, confidence, teamwork. But usually by the time they're in high school or early college, there's a cultural shift where the students can pick up on the idea of like, now I'm supposed to do something serious, or it seems to fall away. And then when folks get a little bit older, that's where a lot of the subscriber base for most theaters, especially regional theaters, their money is coming from older folks who have a lot of time and extra cash on hand to pay $250, $300 a season for tickets. And it's really that middle part that we tend to lose, those middle generations. And that's been a problem for many years. That's not necessarily a problem that has been brought on by the rise of an access to media. But I will say from my own experiences, having now taught students for about the last 10 years, that many students do appreciate theater, and they even come in appreciating theater.
I wonder if there's a Hamilton effect.
Oh yeah, totally. There's usually one thing that they will come in. If they're not somebody who like did theater very seriously as a young person, they will have at least seen a Hamilton, a Wicked, usually a musical. Those Broadway tour road shows are doing a lot of heavy lifting for theater literacy in this country, because it is hard to get to New York or Chicago and to pay $200 a head to see something more experimental,
Right.
or lesser known. But I think that, when we're thinking about what is going on now and the students we are teaching now, I think that one of the understandable and predictable responses to having had so much non-live media at our fingertips, right? That we can get any streaming service or social media platform we want at home on our TVs or our tablets or our phones, is that live experiences are actually something people are now seeking out and still very much enjoy. So a lot of students coming into my classrooms are excited about theater, excited to learn more about it. I also have some students who are super honest and tell me that they find theater cringe, because you have to be very vulnerable to be doing theater. You have to be willing to open yourself up to the idea of like you're going to fail or be perceived as being extra. Um, but if they're enrolled in my class, I am generously going into this idea that they have opened up enough intellectual curiosity to be in this class and to be willing to learn about what theater is, who makes it, why we tell stories through this medium, and how performance today is actually more and more intentionally leaning into its relationship, whether close or far away, to media technologies. So most of the time they leave at the very least with um, knowing more about the immense amount of work that goes into making theater, the artistry, the technical training, the ability to critically analyze, and the soft skills that go into producing this art form, just like the people skills you need to project manage something that big. And they do walk away with a firmer grasp of why theater is different from film or recorded content. And I consider that, if they walk away with just that, I'm pretty happy.
Well, my oldest daughter has worked with the high school here with their theater productions stage
Hmm.
crew, and it is a ton of work, and they do great. And this is high school. I can only
Hmm.
imagine a professional group. It's got to be grueling hours and a commitment. So you speak about time management. I just think of all the skills you can pick up, even if theater doesn't become your livelihood, but just the soft skills that you can pick up
Hmm.
working in that environment. So let me turn to your research. I find the subject fascinating. So maids, mammies, maybes, modern Black actresses and their performance strategy. Tell us about your research and what the takeaways are
Hmm.
to this point in your research.
Sure. My research is centering how acting, this idea that actors perform as a character in like a fictional narrative. So I'm removing the idea of like documentaries or that sort of idea. But I'm thinking about acting on stage and screen and how acting can be a powerful tool for reinforcing or subverting dominant ideologies that are already circulating in the US specifically around race and gender. Um, I'm also thinking about how acting requires all these like behind the scenes dynamics that you need to like professionally network and negotiate your contract and salary, how you interact with producers and directors and fellow co-stars, how you form a relationship with critics and the press. So Maids, Mammies, Maybes, which I'm currently developing as a book, is a social history of four African American women who performed in various forms of American popular entertainment. I'm looking at women who are performing at World's Fairs, in vaudeville theater, Broadway theater, Hollywood film, and network television. I'm looking at this period between the end of the 19th century through the end of the 20th. And I'm looking at how I'm considering how they use like gestures, facial expressions, vocal techniques, stagecraft, and that they are employing those tools of the actor to subvert or revise these cultural notions we have, or that we're circulating and do in many ways still circulate about Black femininity. Now, these are notions that were largely created through whiteness, through the history of enslavement in this country. And um, I'm looking at how these actors are doing kind of subtle revisions to those ideologies, even when they are cast in roles that are based on stock characters or stereotypes, like the maid or like the mammy. Um, so I'm looking, and just to give some folks an idea of like who are these actresses I'm talking about, I'm thinking about performers like Marla Gibbs, who folks would be maybe know best as Florence Johnson in The Jeffersons, Nancy Green, who's the actor who first performed as the living trademark of Aunt Jemima, Hattie McDaniel, the first African American actor of any gender to win an Academy Award, and the singer turned acclaimed stage and screen actor Ethel Waters. And I'm weaving together analysis of archival materials that reflect what they were doing in their performances. And I'm analyzing those through insights into like what is the artistry and the labor of acting.
This comes up in economics a lot,
Mm-hmm.
actually, your unpaid labor. It sounds like for all four of those women probably endured more and had to bring more to their craft to make it as long as they did.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, my book ultimately is arguing that these actors are really savvy performers. They had to do all the obvious parts of acting with all of the strategic choices as well. And they did so and they forged successful careers in an industry that's largely driven by white executives and white creatives. And they are doing that all while also exercising agency and creativity that allowed them to play against and challenge these constructions about around Black women. They're doing this in a balanced way. They're like having to be very subtle to remain employed, and so the ways that they're doing it are either escaping the perception of these like white industry collaborators or are doing it in such a way that it was sort of tacitly accepted or permissed. So I'll give an example. Um, in my chapter on Hattie McDaniel, I trace how she uses eye contact. She's very strategic in how she uses her eyes in a scene. And she did this in a bunch of comedies throughout the mid 1930s. And then I see her using this again when she's playing the character of Mammy in the 1939 epic Gone with the Wind, for which she won the Academy Award. And what's of note to me is that she's inserting very specific points of eye contact or sometimes breaking eye contact with co-stars in her scenes in a way that's not scripted at all. It was not what was written in by the screenwriters or by Margaret Mitchell, who wrote the book Gone with the Wind. These are things that McDaniel is doing. She's actually adapting them from her kind of more comedic acting repertoire to create what Marcelina Morgan, who's a anthropologist and a linguist, she calls it a counter language for the character of Mammy. That is sort of a sense of agency that allowed enslaved Black people and their descendants to articulate a reality that counters the flawed construction of white supremacy. So as Mammy, the character of Mammy, Hattie McDaniel will like kind of sometimes wink at the audience or will look at her co-stars in a certain way that nods to the falseness of the idea of the Mammy stereotype being grounded in reality at all. So I see all of these actresses, McDaniel and others, doing this really interesting form of subversion at a time when there were very few roles of depth or complexity offered to African American performers, and they're doing really interesting work while forging stable, sometimes thriving careers.
It would be wonderful to go back in time and be a fly on the wall and hear what the director was thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Do we keep that? Do we cut and redo it? I grew up watching The Jeffersons. It was reruns.
Same.
But, when I think of, Florence in that role and, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they must have had to do so many takes because she was hilarious. And I felt like so much of her comedy was physical, that
Mm-hmm.
probably was not scripted, but was, to use your word, subversive in its own way. I might have this position as the maid, but I am so much more than that. So I always felt that her character was far stronger than maybe the title would
Mm-hmm.
suggest. Two last questions, and I really appreciate your time, Teri.
Of course.
So what advice would you have for people on how to consume media critically?
Mm-hmm.
If that's, if we watch a show for entertainment value, but if you really want to think about what am I seeing? How are the actors bringing themselves into the role? How do you learn to think critically about television or theater movies that we're consuming?
this is a big topic. Yeah, no, and
Sure,
it's one I'm
sure.
really no, it's really I'm really passionate about.
This will be
And I
part
could talk
2 of
about
the
all day.
podcast.
I'll keep it brief. Life's big questions. But here's some of these are actually some high points that I use when I'm teaching my class on theater and media criticism to my students. So I start by trying to let's just demystify the idea that art or forms of entertainment um, aren't in any way subjective. They are coming from a point of view and a perspective that is influenced by cultural ideologies and political choices. That even if it's entertaining to you, it is going to be deeper than pure entertainment. I personally believe that all art is political in some way. Um, it's arguing something to an audience and therefore keeping like a healthy amount of critical distance from any art or media we consume is a wise thing to do. I think it was Bertolt Brecht who, was deeply worried about the idea of becoming so immersed emotionally and psychologically into an art form that you could be tricked into anything. And he was doing this at a time when he's pushing back against the rise of fascism in 1930s Germany. So I embrace that about just the idea that if we give ourselves over completely and thinking this is just entertainment, I don't need to be critical. Um, I push back on that. But I also will point out to folks that um, asking ourselves like, who is the creator? Who is making this work? Like, who's the writer? Who is the actor? Um, and thinking about like what might they be intending. I'm not advocating necessarily for folks to think only about their intentions, but seeing that there are choices, whether political choices or artistic choices, behind anything somebody does in a work of art, a piece of theater, a episode of television, there's intentionality behind it. Now, does it matter to you as an audience member what that intention might be, or is it the effect it's creating on you? Um, what you want to analyze, and or what is the effect on broader culture? Um, so thinking about there are ways in which the creator, the author, the artist is making choices, and does it matter to you? And lastly, how might wider forces or political structures be taking up that piece of art or media for their own gain, even if it's not what was intended? So these are some questions for everybody to think about. I know they're big questions, but the more you work on it, the more it is easier to do and it feels less like a heavy lift.
I think that makes so much sense. I know, for folks in media studies, and we'll teach some of this in political science, we teach a lot of so for instance, say students are consuming the news,
Hmm.
it's not just the news that they consume, it's also the decisions about what news to present that
Yes.
publishers and editors have already made a decision about what is newsworthy. And I imagine it's something similar. So the writing, the direction, the editing, there are some statements there uh, that the producers of shows have made that just in, well, here's what I'm going to present to you at all. And so that in itself is, is a prior decision
Hmm.
that as a consumer, you're just, oh, this was fun, or this was interesting, or this was an entertaining topic. But what are all the other choices that were made before that was even presented to you? I always like to end these. Um, oh shoot, there was another question I was going to ask you
That's okay.
about. I
I have
okay.
time.
Do you have some artistic creators out there that you wish people knew more about, that you feel they are uh, hidden gems that people should know more about, either literature, actors, storytellers, you name it? Who would those people be?
Sure. So I have a couple playwrights and I have an actor. So the first playwright I want to shout out is Alicia Harris. So she's a playwright. She's also now a film director, and she is the creator of the stunning play Is God Is. And it's a sort of revenge tale, Odyssey road trip fever dream that she recently adapted um, as a feature-length film starring Kara Young and Vivica A. Fox and Sterling K. Brown. So if folks haven't checked out Is God Is, either on stage or on screen, I highly recommend it. Another playwright is Jasmine Lee Jones. She's the creator of one of my favorite plays in recent memory. This play is called Seven Methods for Killing Kylie Jenner. It's a memorable title.
Very
Um,
specific.
very. It's a, but the methods in Jones's play, they're not literal. We're not advocating violence here. But they're more of a kind of dark, provocative metaphor for critiquing white capitalist exploitation, colorism, and the dehumanization of Black women's bodies. So that's a great play. Finally, I got to always return to my actors. And if I had room in my book for another actor, it would be this actor. I just want to shout out, I'm personally living for this era of all things Keke Palmer. Keke Palmer is having her career is in a really exciting point right now. She's acting in interesting projects. She's working with diverse creators across media. She's in films, she's in television, she's doing these really funny videos where she's um, being a culture critic of Hollywood and of the entertainment industry itself. So I think she's stepping into her own right now as a cultural icon, and I'm really excited to see what's next for her.
I will include links to their works in the show notes so people could look those up. And so finally, do you have any book or resource that you'd recommend for listeners who want to learn more about, any of the subjects that we've talked about that are, especially for folks who are maybe just starting their learning journey into theater criticism.
Absolutely. This would be a long list. I'm going to I'm gonna narrow to books. I'm a big book reader. I think we all could be reading more books. I'm going to start with a recent book that's just dropped a couple months ago. It's a book by Ray Lynn Barnes. She's a historian at Princeton, and it's for a wide audience. It's not exclusively for an academic audience. And it's a extensive book called Darkology: Blackface and the American Way of Entertainment. And this book demonstrates the broad reach of blackface minstrelsy across American entertainment. I mean, things you wouldn't think about, performances that were taking place in settings that I, even as a scholar of African American theater and performance, was blown away to encounter. And I found it to be just a really exciting read, and it helped me better understand the histories and hauntings that are directly informing the characters that my own research subjects were responding to in their performances. So Darkology is worth picking up. A slightly older text that informs me greatly, and I think continues to inspire a lot of folks who are interested in this aspect of theater, is Daphne Brooks's Bodies in Dissent. And here she's examining cultural production in the mid-19th century, so we're going a little bit further back. But she's analyzing how Black performance acts of alterity are resisting and undoing attempts to define Black people in cultural imagination. So that's a great book. But I'll end with a great text that came out, I want to say in 2021. It's called Cracking Up: Black Feminist Comedy in 20th and 21st Century US. It's by Caitlin Hale Woods, and she takes on 6 decades of stand-up comedy being performed by Black women. And she's arguing that performers are using humor as a form of political expression, and she looks at what she defines as kind of Black feminist performance through the act of stand-up comedy, all the way from Jackie Moms Mabley to Michelle Buteau. So I highly recommend Cracking Up for folks who might be interested in comedy. It doesn't always have to be kind of the more serious or dramatic dimensions. This one's a great read.
Those sound like wonderful recommendations, and I will include the links to those, and hopefully members of the audience will pick those up and start their own journey into learning more about the world of art and theater and understanding what the performers are bringing to us. Once again, Teri Incampo from the University of Mississippi, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Marvin.